And I believe that we already have the possibility for you to see a live transcript. And if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a CC live transcript button that you can hit to decide whether you'd like to see the transcript or not. So my name is Sarah Burgard. I'm a professor of sociology and the director of the Population Study Center at the University of Michigan. And I have the great pleasure today of introducing our speakers, who are my colleagues here at the University of Michigan. I just want to let you know that at the end of this really wonderful session, we're going to have a Q&A period, but I know that for some of us, it's hard to remember our questions that long. And so if you want to drop them in the chat, I'll be monitoring them and we'll get to them when the Q&A session begins. And then at that time, we'll have a possibility for you to go ahead and raise your hand or indicate, and we'll put some questions forward for our speakers today. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction and then let them launch into their slides. So again, thanks everybody for coming. This is Dr. James McNally. He's the director of the Nafta program on aging, which is a data archive containing over 1,500 studies related to health and the aging life course. And he was originally trained in forensic anthropology, which I found out for the first time today when I was looking at his CV, which sounds quite exciting. At Maryland, then trained in formal demography at Georgetown. Interest in gerontology really sprouted while at Brown University, and also while doing policy application of demographic data at Syracuse at the Center for Policy Research. So connections with lots of us, places we've been. And Jim currently does methodological research on the improvement and enhancement of secondary research data, working on innovative tools and approaches to deliver restricted data in a manner that enhances efficiency, but also subject confidentiality and user needs. Jim has also directed the Nafta program on aging since 1998 and has seen, an enormous growth in the holdings of this data archive on aging, the life course, health, retirement, and international aspects of aging as well. So we're going to learn more about that today. And I also want to say a great thanks to Katherine Lavender, who's a project manager in the Nafta team and joined in 2017 doing that role. So she's going to be presenting as well and does a lot of work with data depositing, restricted use data agreements, data user requests, and long-term planning for the user community. And I know that both Jim and Katherine are interested in hearing from you as the user community about some of the topics we'll talk about today. Katherine joined us at Icpsr at U of M from U of M Dearborn and has a degree in economics and has done a lot of stuff at Icpsr in terms of curation and working with our summer interns at Icpsr and so on. So both of these are fantastic people to be telling you about secondary data available from Nafta and Icpsr. Very relevant to folks in our network. And so I will have Jim take it away now with the slides. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, for that wonderful introduction, which I think I wrote a while ago. So it's almost a humble brag of sorts, but we're really happy to be here. We're always happy to talk about NACDA, to talk about data, talk about aging. This is what we do. And that's one thing I want to emphasize from the beginning. We've been funded by NIA since the 70s to facilitate research. And our goal is to help you be successful in achieving your research goals. So as we go through this talk, I want you to think about ways we could help you further. We're always evolving. We've changed dramatically just over the past 5 years, and we're hoping to change even more dramatically in the next 5. So let us know what your research needs are, where we're serving those needs, and where we could do a better job. We're always looking for new opportunities to improve our collections. Okay. The plan for today's talk is just basically to do a general discussion about NACDA, and then talk a little bit about geography and public use data, both the barriers and the emerging opportunities. After that, we'll turn the presentation over to Katherine, and she'll talk about the nuts and bolts, how to use NACDA, how to find data, download it, how to use our portal, how to share data, both through the the repository and our open source repository and other resources. And then at the end, we'd like to leave some time just for discussion. So you can ask us questions or give us ideas about directions we should be following. We're developing our recompeting now, so we can incorporate really good ideas, if you have them, into the next 5-year plan for NACTA. So this is a wonderful opportunity to show you what we do, how we've done it, and you can tell us how we can do it better. NACTA stands for the National Archive of Computerized Data on Aging. It was originally funded actually by the Administration on Aging in 1976, 1978. And then Ron Abels, who's with the director's office now at NIH, he was a program officer at NIA, and he saw the value of creating a repository that focuses on aging data and supports aging research. So they shifted us over to a P30 center grant, and we stayed as a center grant for 30 years or so, 35 years. Currently, we're a cooperative agreement, as so many of the major projects have shifted over to. And so we've just existed, we've grown. We started with 16 studies, and now we're at 1,600 or something of that nature. And we're part of Icpsr. And this is important because Icpsr is one of the largest accessible repositories of data on a variety of different topics in the world. We have data on aging at NACTA, but we also have other content-focused archives. We have the Demography Project, which is run by John Marcotte, which collects and organizes population data, child and maternal health data, life course data. So there's a lot of overlap between what we do. There's also a criminal justice archive, and this is a growing topic in aging research because increasingly the institutionalized population in the United States especially is aging. Prisons are being filled with people because of the 3 strikes you're out legislation of years ago, of men and women who cannot be paroled, who cannot be released, and who are aging in place within the prison system. And we don't have a good feel on the health needs or how to care for an aging population. So that archive has just tremendous resources. It also has information on crime victimization, which is something that Peter Lichtenberg's been looking at quite a bit at Wayne State. We also have the Research Center on Minority Data, which collects and organizes data that focuses on minority populations and tries to present it in a consistent and usable period. They've also increased their LGBT collections in the past few years. So that is a good place to start. If you're just interested in seeing what we have on different racial minorities and underserved populations. There's a child care archive, there's an education archive, there's a medical archive. We just have a wide array. So if you go to NACTA, you will get the content expertise of aging and gerontology. If you go to the Icpsr website and just look down the main page, you'll see all the different projects we have going on at the present time, and it can be quite fascinating. When I first came in '98, it was sort of like being released into the candy store because I had used Icpsr data at Brown and other places. But to come to the place where it all was and just to have instant access, that was pretty cool. And it's amazing some of the studies we have. We have, one of the original studies of cigarette smoking and health outcomes from back in the 60s. If you start poking around, you never know what you're going to find, but our job is to help you find it. If you have questions about aging data, Katherine and I are happy to help you. If you're interested about population issues, John Marcotte and his staff, et cetera. There is a lot of content experts available to help you identify data because aging is a life course. We start aging the minute we're born. And so we can help you in a very focused way. But ICPSR as an organization can open new realms of team science that many of us haven't even considered. So don't be shy about digging in and just going around. Download something today, and if you don't like it, delete it and come back tomorrow and download something else. We've got a lot of data and we want you to use all of it. NACTA itself is largely directed by myself. I've been the director since '98, as Sarah mentioned, and Katherine Lavender joined us several years ago and actually keeps the trains going on time. And she understands, Katherine has vast experience in archival and data quality. So she is a wonderful resource if you have questions about either how to use the data we have or how to prepare your data for sharing. That's important too, particularly in light of the new NIH data sharing regulations. If you go to our website, we have a lecture or a webinar on that where NIA discusses their expectations and their perspectives on data sharing. So you might want to look at that at some point. So between the two of us, we have librarians who look at publications for our bibliography. We have data curation people who help us manage and organize our data. We have web services. It's just a fantastic organization and allows us to leverage the research dollars we get from NIA to provide you with the best possible product. NACTA in general has been active for 45 years or so. When we were P30, we were almost a vacuum cleaner of data. Anything that came in, we would try to store it and preserve it in some way. And this caused issues just from the backlog because there is so much data. These days, as a cooperative agreement, we're a little more focused on longitudinal data. We're trying to improve it and make it more useful so you can look at life course transitions. Right now, we're working with AdHealth, as this study has essentially aged into a mature study. And the potential of that is fantastic. I mean, we've got a couple of cradle to grave studies. We've got Project Talent and things like this, but AdHealth offers marvelous opportunities for looking at life course transitions from a fairly young age in school into midlife and late adulthood. So the world of data is changing and we're excited to be a part of it. We're happy to work with any partners who can help us push research into new directions. This is one of our nice descriptions. Started off in 1990s. Oh, okay, that's when we started doing internet. We started doing the internet in 92. And before that, and some people may still remember that, you would send in a message, a written letter to Icpsr and through your OR, and they would make a copy of the tape and a Xerox of the code book and mail it back to your OR, and then you would get it, you would put it on your mainframe. We don't do that anymore, thank goodness. It's nostalgic, but it was painful. I remember years ago when I worked for CDC and we would submit our jobs to Atlanta, and you would look and you would see that you were like 162nd in the queue to get your program run. So you'd go and have a cup of coffee and come back, and hopefully your program didn't bomb. Technology has improved tremendously. You can't imagine how much technology has improved in my lifetime. We started with cards when I was a young researcher, and now we just have tremendous amounts of data. And with open source repositories like the NACTA OAR, we have the ability to let people share their data with the research world in a way that was impossible years ago. So constant change. It keeps me young. It really does. Just what's coming around the corner next. Now, when we got the request to do this, I was kind of surprised to see there was an interest in geography and public use data. And this is a conundrum. We all recognize the value of geography and contextual data. It adds so much color and life to our analysis, but it does come with specific methodological problems. And I'm going to give you the old guy's perspective of geography and public use data. But at the end, I'm very interested in hearing what everyone has to say about ways we can overcome barriers and improve our ability to incorporate contextual variables and geography into our analysis. Traditionally, we don't curate a large number of studies with detailed levels of geographies. I would guess probably we may have a couple hundred studies in our collection that would deal with specific geographical areas. There are reasons for this. The main one has always been confidentiality. Geography is disclosive by its very nature. And quite often, researchers choose not to submit it. On the other hand, Icpsr has had a standing policy not to release geography for pretty much its entire life. We have new tools now. We have a virtual data enclave where people can come and analyze data. And we have, new abilities. So it's not just a yes, no anymore, but it's here's what you can do publicly, and then here's how you can get more detailed information. We've worked with several groups, NSHAP, ACL, et cetera, on how we might be able to provide geographical data. And it's entirely possible. There are costs involved. There are steps that have to be taken. And this is another point. Public use data, almost everything is public use. It's a question of what you have to do to get access to it. The lowest level is, like a health interview study. You just download it off the internet and go about your merry way. We have some things like we have the SALSA study from Mary Hahn, and that has genomic data. And you have to go through a number of forms and IRB review to use this data. It's still publicly available. There's no cost. We don't charge you for it, but we do have rules about the access to data. So there is sort of a structured approach to confidentiality. We found over the years that probably 85 to 90% of all research questions can be answered with the public use data. And then there's this subset of very specific research questions that require more detailed geography. And we'll do everything we can to help you achieve that goal. But just bear in mind, it's a negotiated process between NACTA, Icpsr, the investigators, and quite often the federal government. I have a CMS license for some data from the old Duke long-term care survey. And the things we had to do and the forms we had to fill out just to get that license was mind-boggling. But in the end, it worked out, and we do have that information. The other issue is generalizability, and this is the one that worries me methodologically. Geography, even if it's included in a sample survey, it plays havoc with your sample designs. Unless the study is specifically designed to look at low levels of geography, then the sampling properties, statistical properties of a frame are lost if you start adding contextual data. You start talking about, instead of a weighted variable that represents 50 to 100,000 individuals, you start talking about Bob and where Bob lives and what Bob has access to in terms of hospitals or employment. And that has implications. You have to think very carefully about just tacking on geography and contextual information to a national level survey. We have tools. We can address these issues now, but it is an issue that has to be considered in your research strategy. And also cost. I mean, the more precise you can make your stratum, the more precise you can make your sample, well, then your variability is impacted in a positive way. And you can say a lot more about what the sample is telling you, but it's expensive because you have to collect more cases or more focused cases or less generalizable cases. You have to concentrate your resources. Back at Georgetown, Basaldo made us memorize the bang for your buck formula, which was how many dollars do I have to spend to get a certain sample size? And if I don't have those dollars, then I can't get the sample I need, and then I'm going to have bias. So now they have all these very nice calculators on the internet where you can do it. But Neil Dace, you sat down there with your Hewlett-Packard calculator and your yellow legal pad and your pencil, and you figured it out yourself. It was an interesting exercise. I'm glad we don't have to do that anymore either. The main thing when we talk about geography and contextual data is that universe matters. Most major health surveys are fielded at a national or regional frame. In other words, they try to create population statistics that will tell you about the US, tell you about England, tell you about the UK, tell you about a specific large population group. And that's very valuable information. But once we start breaking it down into smaller units than it was actually designed to capture, we start introducing sort of odd biases. We have to be careful about that. But we also care about lower level geography. Social determinants of health models, they are dependent on community level frames. You have to know what's going on in the communities. You have to compare communities to other communities to understand how the nature of the neighborhood, the resources available, the poverty, the education, sort of the matrix of the neighborhood impacts the outcomes of individuals living in those neighborhoods. And you have to think of it at the community level frame. You can't just slap social determinants of health model onto a HRS or a NHIS and hope to get really precise measures. And then population health models, which are almost by definition individual or small group models. We're interested in why Larry died and Charlie didn't after heart surgery. And Larry lives in Ann Arbor and can go to the University of Michigan cardiac unit, and the other guy lives in Arkansas and has to travel 150 miles to get a follow-up from a good cardiologist. These are the kinds of very low-level geography that tell us incredible things about health outcomes. But we do want to keep the universe in mind. Quite often what we suggest, particularly if you're doing a community level study, is use the questionnaire from an established study, such as the Health Interview Survey. There's a researcher at ISR who does research on Pacific Islanders, and she has used the National Health Interview Survey as her questionnaire for looking at health outcomes among Pacific Islanders in communities in California. And what this does is it allows her to make direct comparisons between health outcomes and health needs of this small, very understudied population and compare it to national rates. This is a powerful statement. So even if you don't want to be tacking on geography to major health studies, you can use that information as a comparative tool. So all of this information has value, and it can be used productively in your research and will help you discuss these ideas you may have. And if we can, maybe provide you with some guidance or just talk about it, because we're fascinated in what y'all are doing as well. In terms of just international geography, almost by definition, we're primarily US national samples. We do have data from China, Ireland, South Africa, Japan, Sweden, etc. We have a smattering of this and that. Part of this is because most people don't realize how lucky we are to live in the United States in terms of freely accessible data. Most countries have very strict restrictions on data sharing and data access. I've been working with people in Singapore for over a decade to get access to some of their longitudinal studies of aging. And while both parties are very interested in doing that sharing, the legal issues of getting data out of Singapore so other people can use it, they seem insurmountable. They're not. I spent over 15 years getting the World War II twin study from the Institute of Medicine here at National Academies. And it was just an endless series of discussions, but in the end, we persevered because we thought this data was important. So if you're interested in twin data, you should come look at our World War II twin study. It's really quite fascinating. But in any case, just by the nature of laws, we don't archive a lot of international studies, but we do provide links. We try to keep track of what's going on, and we will help you facilitate access if we can. We're happy to introduce you to the PIs of foreign studies where you might have an interest in their data set, and just talk about some of the technicalities of getting access to studies. You know, some stuff share, the British study, that's just a matter of registering and downloading. It's very straightforward. Other situations are a lot more complicated, but this is what we do for a living. We worry about these issues, we're interested, and we'd be happy to provide you some guidance if there's a data set you're particularly interested in. There are other resources. And again, if you start with sort of the idea of, I want to study a particular community or a particular group I'm advocating or researching, then you can start by looking at the broad sort of differentials to identify areas that require attention that would benefit from better research. And then you can build your study from there. And again, you can use questionnaires and validated questions from national studies to give you direct comparative access. This is kind of a fun one. This is the hunger map. This is an international project, and it lets you look at nutritional deficit areas throughout the world. And you can get a number of statistics. You can drill down to specific geographic areas. You can download data, and you can start to build an argument on why studying one area as opposed to another is important, particularly from an aging context, because it's odd, but nutrition in the elderly is really understudied. Dental care is such a huge issue in nutrition and overall health among the elderly, but there's so little research done on the difficulty of getting dentures after tooth loss. In the Pacific, we have sort of a saying that the old people live on fish and bread dipped in milk because of tooth loss, and they suffer nutritionally because they can't eat certain foods. Anything that's hard, it's just not going to happen. So this is sort of a broad worldwide view. There's also the Opportunity Atlas, which is a major project at Harvard. It tries to focus more on young, but again, life course. These young people have parents. These young people have grandparents, older adults, and there's just a huge amount of census and other statistical data that's attached to very low level geography. And you can just go in there and do all sorts of fascinating things. If you haven't looked through this atlas yet, you should just play around. Again, this is what we do. We play with data. We try to find information that gives us ideas about how the world works. And these kinds of visual geographic tools are incredibly valuable. There's also the Food Access Research Atlas. Now, prior to the last presidential administration, this was called the Desert Atlas, but I guess they decided that sounded too unhappy. So they renamed it the Food Access Research Atlas. This is at the USDA. And basically what it does is identifies food deserts in the United States, places where people have to travel long distances in order to get access to a grocery store or to just basic nutritional necessities. And again, you can drill down. This is what Detroit looks like. We know Detroit is a food desert. There's a Whole Foods and a bunch of bodegos, and that's about all that Detroit is offering. And this shows you all of the neighborhoods, all the census areas where there is no place to buy food at a reasonable price. And it pretty much covers the entire city of Detroit. So that's stark, but you can also do comparisons. This actually didn't surprise me, but kind of surprised me. This is Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, which is the low income city next to Ann Arbor. And if you look here, this blue area is group housing. In other words, University of Michigan dormitories. The green area is places where people do not have a vehicle and more than half a mile from the nearest supermarket. A lot of student housing up in here, a lot of student residential. Barton Hills, which is right next to it, is a very high income, lots of cars, lots of access. So it's very narrowly defined in the Ann Arbor area where these food deserts are. It's mostly around the University of Michigan where the students live, low income, fewer cars. But then you go to Ypsilanti, and essentially the whole area is a food desert. And the blue area here is where Eastern Michigan University dorms are. But all around it, this is the stark example of poverty. Ypsilanti is a low income area. Ann Arbor is not. There are resources in Ann Arbor to make sure you can get good, healthy, fresh foods, farmers markets, etc. Ypsilanti, it's more of a shooting match, particularly if you don't have a car. So these kinds of maps are very useful just to give you a broad overview of the potential problems of a community or research area you'd like to pursue. And from there, it's a matter of collecting the data, sharing it with us, and becoming famous. This is another cool place, the NASA Socioeconomic Data and Application Centers, and they just have a pile of maps, all sorts of things you can look at. And just go there. They have COVID, they have POP, they have neighborhood analysis. It's really quite a fascinating place. You can spend several days just looking at maps, and if you have the time. Now, I did want to mention also, and this was brought to my attention, and I should have said something. We also have a community level mapping and information resource at Icpsr. It's called NANDA, and I'll put the web link up at the end of the presentation. But this is an NIA funded project that is, quickly tell you what it says. It's measures on topics of interest: socioeconomic, disadvantage, affluence, walkability, crime, land use, recreational centers, libraries, fast food, climate. And this is a huge thing. And it's in the Icpsr open source repository. So it's constantly growing, constantly being used. And along with that, if you're interested in seeing the potential of this kind of community level, geographically focused research, there's the Chicago Neighborhood Study, which is maintained by Icpsr. And they did everything. They took videotapes of neighborhoods. They did door-to-door censuses. They collected just this huge wealth of information. I haven't looked at it in a couple of years, so I'm not sure how if it's been added to recently. But if you wanted to design a study to understand a city area, that is a wonderful template. Of course, Chicago is known for its community level research. So those are a couple of things. Now I'm going to turn it over to Katherine, and she will go through how you get access to all this wonderful stuff. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, Katherine.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Okay, I am Katherine Lavender, the data project manager for the Aging Archive within Icpsr. And thank you everyone for being here today. So Jim talked a little bit about what we have housed within Nafta and Icpsr, and I just wanted to go into some details about that. So if you were to go to nafta-aging.org, our website, and go to the search, and you're trying to search through our website, you'll see several different ways. You can search at the study level, by data related publications, by variables, by series. You can even see some announcements or maybe articles we've shared. If you look at the NACDA website tab here, I'm going over it with my cursor. It's to the right of the screen. Anyway, so you can search across all those different kinds of formats. You can also use the filters on the left-hand side of the search page, particularly when you want to drill down to a specific geographic location. We have tagged these studies at the collection level, at the study level, to indicate which area they represent. And so that's what that filter will help you narrow down to. So if you're looking for data from specifically California or something to that effect, that's the filter that you would use. If you're searching by study, and we typically try to include some geographic information in the title. The standard for our titles usually will follow sort of like content, geographic area, and time frame. But if you were searching more for a geographic term, I put in county in this example from the search, you'll see that the titles are given the most weight for the search results. And so there are more than 900 studies just within NACDA that have county in the title, and you'd have to kind of look into each of those studies further, preview some of the documentation to see if it has what you need. But you can search that way. So if you're on a study page and you are trying to find out more about the geography and what's included, and you want to locate what kind of geographic variables are included in a study from the study page, you would see that in this geographic coverage field. And in this particular example from the WHO study on global aging and adult health, wave 1, the geographic coverage field is right there near the bottom of the screenshot. This would be in the at a glance view from the study page. And you can see that there's respondents from China, South Africa, Mexico, Ghana, India, and Russia included in this study. We typically, when something's international, we typically add the term global to it to help people when they're searching across collections that are not just US national. If you want to search at the variable level, which is my favorite way to search because I feel like it really gives you insight into what is in the data specifically, you can see again, I used county as my search term. And when you're using a single word search term, you don't need to put quotation marks around it. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. If you're using a multi-word search term, please do use quotation marks in your search around the whole term. So I searched for county, and you can see that if I select the variable tab from the search page, there's more than 5,000 results that have the term county somewhere in that variable level information or variable level metadata. That means it's in the variable label, in the question text associated with that variable, or in the value labels. And what we see are some results from the panel study of income dynamics for county variables. It looks like county where the respondent grew up from this example. Usually with publicly available data, we won't have geographic variable indicators smaller than county or region. Every every now and then you might see that like something has state level data, but it really depends on the content of the collection. So when we evaluate studies for disclosure risk, or basically how sensitive is the content of this collection, we assess it based on risk of re-identification to the respondent, as well as the harmfulness of the content if the respondent were to be identified and this information were to be found out about them. And so you might find that there are publicly available studies that have even like city level data, but maybe the data is, maybe that collection is only about a city, it's not about people. So the risk and the harmfulness are both low in that situation. If you're searching for geography as a topic, kind of like earlier I showed a slide where I had county and I was searching at the study level and county might show up in the title. That could be about counties, or it could be that there's actually county level data in there. That's not necessarily about the county, but about the people within it. Anyway, geography as a study topic is a different way to approach it. And you can see that from the Icpsr page, you might stumble upon this topics view from the search. And there's a variety of topics that have been identified by Icpsr, and geography and environment is one of them. And if you were to go here and click on that, what you would find are studies that revolve around travel and other geographic behaviors. So it could be travel for recreational purposes. It could be everyday travel, like measuring how respondents, how far they have to go to and from work or to and from the grocery store, like the example that Jim gave. They're actually pretty interesting. You might also find some specific areas that have been studied in those geographic study topics. Getting a little bit more into geography, if you are looking for GIS data from the Icpsr website, this is another example where the filters will come in handy. So we go through every single data collection that comes in to add this collection level metadata to make it easier for data users to discover data and understand the potential research use of these data. And one of the things that we flag are the data type. And so the data type filter, as you'll see on the left-hand side of the screenshot example, it will indicate whether something is GIS, quantitative, qualitative, or maybe all of the above. So in this example, I selected specifically GIS, and you can see that we have a variety of results that come up. And a lot of these, I have to say, are, I think, from our criminal justice archive. They have a lot of GIS and geography data, and it's usually restricted, as Jim indicated. This is because anything that's GIS and like kind of about an area, for instance, we have a historical geographic collection called HUE, H-U-E, historical urban ecological, I think is the meaning of that acronym data. Anyway, that is public use because it's not about individuals, but in the criminal justice archive, they have a lot of data about incidents that have occurred within an area, and those are, they do have more risk and more harmfulness, if users are identified, or I'm sorry, not users, if respondents were to be identified. So they have some additional hoops to jump through in order to access those data. As Jim mentioned, Icpsr also has this National Neighborhood Data Archive, NANDA. And if you go to their website, you'll see this great chart where they've outlined some popular NIA-funded studies, along with some metadata about those studies and what kind of linkages might be possible from those data and where they've been aggregated to reflect these different geographic areas. If you go further and click, to go to the NANDA repository, you'll see that it's organized by topic. and you can see the different geographic levels that are included in the studies for each of those topics. One thing you'll need to know about any of our open self-published data archives is that they are not searchable at the variable level at this time. This is because self-published collections are, as it's described, they're published by the data depositor in the materials that that person has. And so our variable search is powered by DDI, and we create DDI whenever we curate a data collection. So that variable search is unique to curated data materials from Icpsr. Nevertheless, Open Icpsr has a wealth of data, and NANDA is one of the open Icpsr archives. And they did a great job in organizing this by topic as well to make it easier for users, since it's not searchable at a variable level or something like that. And so if you click on each of these topics, it will take you to a listing of studies where you can investigate further about the kind of data set that it is. Whether it's curated or self-published, you will need to register with a My Data account to download. My Data accounts are free. We never spam you, we never sell the information, and you really don't even need to put in that much in order to register, really, like your name and your email and your institutional organization affiliation. If you have one, it benefits you to put it in because Nafta, as Jim mentioned, is federally funded, and that means that we're required to make our data freely available to all public. And it is, with exception to some restricted data, you can go to the site and download it within a matter of minutes, and anybody can. But the Icpsr archive is member funded data. And so if you indicate that you are a part of a member institution, then you have free access to any Icpsr data, including the data that's not federally funded. So you'll want to include that. And like this could mean you're a student, your staff, you're an alum of a university or organization that's a member institution. When you download, you're going to want to select the files that you want using, there's a couple different download buttons. They're pretty clearly marked, but either way, select the files that you want to download. You'll have the choice to download by a specific format like SPSS, or maybe even just a specific file if you go to the data and documentation tab from a study page. You want to agree to the terms of use, and basically you're agreeing not to disseminate the data yourself. You're also agreeing only to use the data for ethical research purposes, and it's like one page. It's pretty easy to read and get through and agree to. And then you want to make sure you're logged into My Data, and when you hit download, you'll check your downloads folder. You can see that I included an image from my downloads folder, and what you'll see is a zipped package, this Icpsr _ and then that 5-digit number, that's the study number. And we also include the version of the study that you've downloaded in that file name. And when you go into the zipped package, you'll see all your materials right there, ready for you to use. We get a lot of questions about why does it come in a zipped package? And this is for internal infrastructure reasons, as well as metadata reasons. Essentially, Icpsr has studies that are either a single data set or multiple data sets. And having the zipped package allows us to support both a single and multi-data set download for any user. So if you're going to a study page where there's one data set and you're like, yeah, I want the SPSS file, you're going to get the SPSS data file and a PDF codebook or whatever other documentation is required to accompany that material. If you go to a multi-data set study and you select SPSS, you're going to get the SPSS data file for every data set in that collection, and along with the documentation. And so the zipped package kind of allows us to make this happen. The metadata reasons, data sets, it can be very easy to get mixed up. And so we want to make sure you have the documentation that goes with it. so that you have all the information you need to use the data appropriately and efficiently. And so documentation is the metadata that has to accompany the data files. So moving on to another way to search are data-related publications. If you go to our search and you want to search for something, I use the term geographic. I try to think of the most broad term applicable to this presentation I could think of. And so I used geographic, and I went to the data-related publications tab, and you see that just using this broad term, we have 70 results. And you would have to go into the data-related publication links to kind of see more information about what these related publications are about. But right up front, you can see which data set they used. So the first example, a romantic partnering patterns of mixed race individuals. And the data set that it is linked to are the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health data, AdHealth, that Jim mentioned. So that's really cool to see what's there, give you an idea of which data it used and or that author used. And this is basically how you can discover how the data are being used across the research community. It's also a good tool for networking. Like Jim said, we're happy to put you in contact with people who might be able to answer your questions that we can't answer, or you might partner with for research opportunities. And this is a way that you yourself can go in and say, well, I'm interested in looking at this particular topic. Who else has done this work? If you use some of our data, whether or not you got it from us, and you're like, oh yeah, I would love to have my research included in the data-related publications, we have an email here, icpsr-nacta@umich.edu, or when we share these slides, there's a link to a citation submission form in the slide, but you could go to Icpsr and look up the citation submission form and use that to submit as well. But we would love to share your data-related publications for research that you've completed, and link them to the studies that represent the data you used. And that's just one way you can share with the research community. Since we've talked mostly about publicly available data, I wanted to touch a little bit on restricted data, and mainly how you can identify whether or not data is restricted. And so the example I have here is from the MIDAS Milwaukee cohort. And this is kind of a great geographic example, because the MIDAS studies are public use. They don't really have any geographic variables. They're nationally representative, but the Milwaukee sample is an exception, and it is restricted because it narrows down this very specific population. And so that increases the risk of re-identification and the harmfulness of this information getting out to those respondents who participated in these data. And so it's restricted, but the nice thing about this data is that we mainly track the people who are using it to make sure that they're just using it for ethical research purposes. No IRB is required to access these data. But how you would know a study is restricted is if you go to the study page, you can see this access restricted data button. And also there would be a note highlighted in red indicating that one or more files in the collection are restricted. If you click on that access restricted data button, it will have a pop-up where you could download the use agreement and read that. Another way, I didn't put a slide in for this, but another way you might know how data are restricted is that we have a filter for that on the search page, and you could look just across restricted data if you so desired. So a little bit about accessing restricted data from NACTA. You download that agreement from the study page, read it, and make sure you do, because every agreement is a little different. Complete the required fields and protocols. Some do require an IRB and reason, like your research purpose of reason. You want to make sure you sign it. I have printed in here, sign it. So this was created pre-COVID. We do accept verified digital signatures on documents, but you could just print it, scan it, or print it, sign it, scan it, and send us that as well. We just basically require an original signature. And then you email it to us. We have a short video on our site about accessing restricted data that you can watch. Within Icpsr, there's varying levels of restrictions. And so we've got public use, then we've got restricted with what Nafta does here, where there's a couple extra hoops. We review the applications and then we provide an encrypted link that's password protected, files, so that you would access that. It goes through a couple different people. Then there's another level of restricted, and that would be the virtual data enclave. And that means that those data in the virtual enclave are only available in this specific virtual environment that is not connected to anything else in the rest of the internet world. You can only use it there. You can't extract anything from it. It's mainly just, you do your work in there, and anything that you would need to get out would need to be reviewed to make sure that you're using the data within the parameters that we allow. So you'll find that some restricted collections within Icpsr have data in the VDE. There's yet another level of restricted, and it's the physical data enclave. And that means that those data are so restricted that we have a room within Icpsr, and you have to use data at a computer within that room and in that room only, and you cannot take anything in or out. You can't take your cell phone in there. You just go in and you have your login credentials that you've applied for, and you use the data there, maybe jot down some notes, and but yeah, it's very restricted in the physical enclave. So now that we've talked a little bit about the different ways you can access data within Nafta and Icpsr, I wanted to talk about the Nafta Collectica portal. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you to our portal page. And the portal is unique because it facilitates efficient comparisons of longitudinal data on aging. And it's a side-by-side view. Some of the examples I showed you from our site show you a stacked variable search. That's how it will appear in the Icpsr search results, which is great. In Icpsr, we do a wonderful job, I think, of making sure that the variable level metadata is present so that users can know, can search and discover and easily identify the data they need before they download. The portal is nice though, because it provides users with the ability to create custom subsets and data sets and documentation from longitudinal collections and view them side by side. This is powered by DDI Lifecycle, and we work with Collectica software to make it happen. So this is just an image of what the homepage looks like, so you know what to expect when you get to the portal homepage. You'll need to log in, and there are different credentials than My Data. You could make them the same if you wanted to, but essentially it's just to let you know it's a different data access mechanism. So when you get into the portal, this there's only public data in the portal. Right now we have the National Social Life Health and Aging Project, NCHAP. There are 3 rounds of that, and we also have the metadata for the MIDAS series in this, and we've done some work to compare NCHAP across rounds, but also NCHAP to MIDAS, as well as NCHAP to the National Health and Aging Trends Study, NHATS. So I went into our portal and I went to the Explore feature. I clicked on the NCHAP MIDAS comparison and selected neighbors and current neighborhood. And this is great because we have done the work to identify within these aging collections different topics they represent. And so you have the opportunity to see, do these data sets have the variables you need, but also you get to see what they don't have. And so, in this example, you'll see that we identified years lived in current neighborhood, and both NCHAP across the series and MIDAS across the series have variables that are directly comparable to each other for this content. So if you were looking to analyze respondents within an aging population group, this would be like midlife to older adult age, and find out how long they've lived in their current area, and make other inferences from that. You could use NCHEP and MIDAS for that. If you were to click on any of the hyperlinks in there, you could see the variable level information. So this is just a screenshot. If you're using the search feature, I typed in neighborhood, and you can see that one of the first results is safe alone neighborhood at night. And that's, if you click on that, it will show you more information at the variable level for that result. And so this is the, variable view of what the example I was just showing, and you can see that this example comes from MIDAS, and we can see across the MIDAS series some of the unweighted frequencies for those variables. So if you were going to go to the portal and create some custom data sets, here's an example I took from the NSHAP to NHATS comparison, and I went to the respondent demographics topic. You would select variables by using the plus sign. I selected education level, and we can see that the kind of match between NSHAP to NHATS for education level is a many to one match. And that means that there are many variables in NSHAP that compare to one variable in NHATS where they're related. So you as a data user would have to do some work to, match up that information at the variable level in order to analyze them. But when you use that plus sign, the variables get added to your basket. And then you can go to your basket and you'll see that you can download data, the public data for NSHAP from your basket here by using the download data, and the options to download include CSV and SPSS. The metadata, you can download documentation where you're like, maybe I just want to save this for later to remind me to download these data. You can get PDF documentation, CSV, you can get DDI 3.3 XML. And I think there's one more option. For NHATS, they distribute their own data. So we only show the metadata, but this is a great way for you to see what's there before you decide to, apply for access to NHATS. And, it will also help you identify which data sets you would need before you go there. So we talked a little bit about accessing data and public and restricted data, and we talked a little bit about open Icpsr archives. Nafta also has an open archive where you can self-publish. So say you do some research on aging, and you include some geographic or spatial references that are publicly available to other people, you could share your code and what you the steps you took to do that. And like say you used MIDAS, if you submit that and self-publish that, when people search for MIDAS, your work will come up in the same search results as the MIDAS studies. And so that's another way that you can contribute to the research community. This is a screenshot of our deposit page, and it shows you the two different ways to deposit, and the self-publish option is our NACTA OAR. This is a screenshot of our NACTA OAR homepage, and there are some directions on how you can, complete your deposit. We also have some best practices for sharing code and for data sharing that you can check out. And you might be wondering, why would I self-publish? Well, you control the content and the versioning, and it allows quick availability for a DOI. So say you need that DOI for publication reasons, you can get it very easily. Your data, as I mentioned, or your syntax, or both, would be discoverable through Icpsr and the NACTA site searches. And it's just a really great way to share code and replication data with other people, and see what other people are doing, have people see what you're doing. And we have a lot of self-published archives now that are flourishing. If you have any questions, please email us at icpsr-help@umich.edu. If you email that one, it will go to all of anyone who needs to know it in Icpsr, and somebody will get it to the right person. And if it needs to go to me or Jim at NACTA, it will get to us. If you just want to go straight to me and Jim directly, you would email us at icpsr-nacta@umich.edu. Here's some more links on other data resources. Particularly, we like to promote the health and retirement study, since we're all related within ISR, but also through NIA, the Center for Social Research and Data Archives, the Gateway to Global Aging Data. That's a really great metadata resource to see HRS sister studies and the topics that they cover, and the World Health Organization. If you want to stay in the know about what we're doing at NACTA and other presentations and just like popular data releases, things like that going on, subscribe to our news and our quarterly newsletter. And you can find that from the homepage on NACTA. So we'd like to take some time now to answer any questions you may have about how you might find data or create new data resources, basically, or if you have any research interests that you're curious if we know any insider information. Jim, is great for this. He knows everything about the data collections that we house.
So probably just stop sharing and open it up to the group. Sure.
And if you are shy and you want to reach out to us later, we have various ways you can reach out to us through our website, through social media. We also have a playlist on YouTube, the NACTA YouTube playlist. You can access that through Icpsr's channel. And we've got lots of webinars and podcasts recorded, including some about the twin studies that Jim mentioned, the Swedish twin studies. And yeah, I will stop sharing now.
Thanks so much, Jim and Katherine. That was really informative and helpful. I've been monitoring, and I don't think I have any standing questions at this point. But if folks have questions, they can either drop them in the chat, or you can use the raise hand feature, or whatever seems easiest for you. Or if you are impatient, you can just open up your microphone and scream it out at us. But I see a question from Jennifer.
Thanks, Sarah. So Jim, Katherine, this was amazing. I did not realize everything that was available on NACTA. So I really appreciate the tutorial, and I'm so excited about going in and digging around for some gems in there. Mm-hmm. I did have a question about the user provided data. I'm not quite clear about what that all entails. So at first I thought it included data that users had created. So for example, county level data on, tobacco tax, and they, could submit that so others could use that data to merge into the data set. And then later in the presentation, I thought, oh, maybe I'm mistaken. And maybe what users are uploading is like Stata code to analyze existing surveys, or maybe it's all the above. Can you talk a little bit more about what that user provided information contains?
Sure. Yeah, it is very much an all of the above kind of situation. As an evolving project, originally we would take pretty much any NIA funded study and format it, reprocess it, turn it into a standard product, and release it through the main NACTA repository. Now that we're a U, we have much more discussion with NIA about where we focus our resources. So we generally use the repository funding to work on major longitudinal studies, MIDAS, NHADS, ACL, EdHealth. That's where we want to direct our resources. But we don't want to discount anyone else's work, particularly with the increasingly clear guidance from NIH about data sharing. So we created the open repository where anyone can upload, same thing you said, tobacco impacts, any precise subject. We give it a look for confidentiality issues, but generally it's a way for people to share their data quickly, get a data identifier that can be tracked through like Google, and get user statistics. And then if they update or change things, the newest thing, and for that, our advisory committee was really important for that, suggested a code repository. And we've had the beginnings of success where people are submitting their code to us, particularly Midas code. So people don't have to reinvent the wheel. If there's a good way of managing and organizing variable structures, creating scales, things like that, then we're really happy to see that come into the open repository. It saves time, it saves work, and it also gives the people who are creating this kind of information credit for their cleverness. If you can create a really good way of manipulating data, then if you share it, you should get credit. So we have a citation that goes with it, and people can cite it in that this clever person created this code that I used in my publication. So all of the above. We really want to continue to support the whole universe of aging data, but in terms of federal resources, they have to be focused on what NIA considers to be high priority studies.
Yeah, everything Jim said for sure. And I think that I just wanted to clarify. So Nafta is a part of Icpsr, and so Jim and I can't help but be, all in with Nafta information and the open aging repository that Nafta hosts. That it will have the same types of rules as open Icpsr, because that's the infrastructure we use. But we have our own NIA boundaries we have to operate within. And NIA definitely, as Jim said, would like to see code sharing across the research community. But as for data sharing within the OAR, we've also had projects like at the University of Michigan use it to share their data, like the National Poll on Healthy Aging. Researchers, principal investigators can use the OAR to self-publish data that maybe they've done a great job with, and they don't need us to curate it. They just really need a DOI. They need to get it out there. And as Jim mentioned, I forgot to put this point in my slide, and really importantly, anybody who self-publishes can track the usage. You can see how much something is downloaded. So it is really, you're doing the work that we would do to share the data with the research community when you're using an open repository. But even though we're all in with Nafta, we're part of Icpsr. So we are aware of what is happening with the other open archives within Icpsr. So some projects specifically have their own self-publish repositories, like the AEA and NANDA, I think, is an example of this, where they have data that a research team has done work to create these materials and aggregate information, and they've basically created their own self-publishing repository so that they can share data through Icpsr so that it has more discoverability, and so that users can find everything basically in one place related to social science data.
I mean, one of the interesting things, and we don't have the math yet to do this, but even when I was a postdoc at Syracuse, I was really interested in data repositories and using population modeling, where we treat the entire repository as a single data set. And how do we connect the dots across time, across place? And it's a distributional thing. Lee Lillard's worked quite a bit on this, or not Lee Lillard is gone. Oh, who am I thinking of over at Biostats? Sarah, tall, thin, gray-haired, beard, brilliant, little acerbic, worked with
I didn't
Donald
have to think about
Rubin,
it.
worked with Donald Rubin for years.
Is it Rod Little?
Rod, yes, Rod Little. Thank you. Yes, I mean he wrote a really nice piece on the whole conceptual idea, and it always excited me because we do see this, and psychologists try to do this all the time because they're less bound by methodological issues. They're more interested in variable construct and the validity of the question, so they're less concerned about the sampling. But this is the way. How can we play with this data? I mean, multiple imputation open huge opportunities for us to work with data that's traditionally difficult. And if you're willing to stretch the boundaries, I wrote a paper with Sharon Sassler years ago where we imputed the marital outcomes of cohabitating couples. And it was missing for about half the sample. So we said, okay, fine, we'll make it a hypothetical population and based on what we know. And it was a nice paper. It was an experiment. It's the same way with contextual. You can use simulation modeling. You can use, I mean, the advances we've made in Bayesian probability analysis opens up a new way of looking at data that these young people with energy are exploring and just amazing me. I get excited about the data, and fortunately I have Katherine to drag me back into reality of what we can actually do. But
I have a
if you
question for you
Sure.
from somebody that's about the practicalities and the excitement. So we have a question. On average, how long does it take to gain permission to access restricted data? From my recent experience, it could take more than 6 months to review the request and the proposal submission. Could you tell us about the expected range of sort of how long this might take?
Sure. And thank you for these questions. So as I said, Jim and I are involved with NACTA specifically. And with NACTA, our restricted data right now, Jim and I work very hard to encourage any data depositor to have some publicly available data for a collection. If they also give us restricted data, we try to work with them to find out what really does need to be restricted and then how does that translate to access. And a great example of this is NSHAP. For years, NSHAP was only restricted. And Jim worked with them to ultimately get the public data. And he told them for years that it would greatly increase the use of those data, the secondary use. And what we've seen is a drastic decrease in the requests for restricted access for NSHAP. We still get the requests, but the public data meets the need. Yeah. And so within NACTA, you'll find that we can respond to our restricted data requests pretty quickly because we don't have that many. I would say there are approximately 30 to 35 restricted data collections that NACTA owns that NIA has something to do with. Yeah. And those, they vary from requiring IRB to maybe just being for tracking, like you fill out a form and we review it in-house. And we try to address NACTA restricted data requests within a couple of weeks, and you'll see that on our website. Now, there are people behind every process, and so it does depend on our queue and our workload, and sometimes it can be really quick, like same day. Sometimes it can take that full 2 weeks or longer. I find that it usually takes longer if someone submits an application and they think they've completed it, but I have to reach out to them and get more information, or when there are transitions, like if their contracts officer has to sign it on behalf of their institution, but then maybe there's a change in the personnel. So that can extend the time it takes to actually get the data to somebody who's requested it. Outside of NACTA and across Icpsr, the variety of restricted data increases greatly. And so you've got collections that are similar to what we house within NACTA, where it can happen in a couple weeks, but you've also got much more restricted collections, much more risky data and harmful to those respondents, if I'm being plain about it. It's also very valuable data. And sometimes the people behind those teams that have very large queues and very large workloads, and also they use a system, it's a restricted data access system that is much more formal, and it requires both parties, the person requesting the data and the people on our side, to be very thorough and complete. And you're right, that process, getting it right and making sure you've provided all of the materials appropriately, all the signatures are in the right spot, you've provided, you know, your CV, your IRB and everything, that can take months sometimes. And I hope that you got the data that you needed. And if there's additional help you need, you can email us and we can forward it to the person that might be in charge of that. But yeah, it can take time, and you really need to read through those data use agreements.
Yeah, I would have said 1 to 2 days. So, but you know, realistically, the biggest problem we see with our restricted data requests is people not reading the paperwork carefully, particularly graduate students. When there's an IRB review involved, typically you're required to have your mentor or your dissertation chair be the responsible party. And a lot of times we'll get the graduate student hasn't read it carefully, they sign, and then we have to send it back and explain we're sorry. And also, if you're asking out of the state of California or the University of Chicago, expect some headaches, because they have some of the weirdest IRB circumstances that I've ever run across in my life, because this is all non-human subjects data. It is stripped of, except in very rare occasions. So there should be no IRB issues at all on your end when you apply. You just, you know, it's exempt for or non-human subjects, and off it goes. But we do find that certain IRB systems have different interpretations, and we're used to that. We can help you work through it. So if you get any pushback from your IRB, let us know, and we'll help you.
Thank you. And I would like to say that I thought IRB was difficult. So I'm glad to know that the pros over there at Icpsr really have the inside dope on which IRBs are the most interesting. So further good information for the field. Thank you. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to raise? I'm seeing not new ones in the chat, and I'm not seeing raised hands, and we are almost at time. I would like to turn it over to Jennifer at this point.
You're turning it over to me?
You were waving at me.
Oh, because I was going to ask another question.
Oh, ask another question.
So you're talking about the restricted data and, you know, the process for getting that. Does that apply to getting access to the virtual data enclave, or is that process different?
So most of the time when you are applying to data that's within the virtual data enclave, it's going to have an official process where you have to use the restricted data access system. There are forms that you need to fill out, online forms. And, you know, and somebody actually has to, like, it's the equivalent of creating like a folder with you, a folder for you as a data user within that virtual environment, you know, with that specific virtual address in a sense. And so I forget what your question was in the process of answering that. So does it apply? I think, does this apply? I think that every restricted data collection is unique. It's like we'd say any collection within Icpsr is basically a snowflake, but particularly with the restricted data collections, unless you're working within a series, they're going to be, you know, sometimes just slightly different from each other. But yeah, so we can't say that everything we've said applies to all. For ours, they generally take a couple weeks, but across Icpsr it can vary widely. And some of the teams are are bigger, they have more resources, and you know, they handle those things, you know, no problem. But some of the teams have highly restricted data and are still very small teams with a great amount of demand, and you know, they do the best they can.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your questions.
Well, I think I will turn it over to you, Jennifer, now to see if there's anything remaining announcements or wrap up that needs to happen.
I didn't have any planned announcements. We have one more seminar sponsored by the network. Will take place in early December. We'll bring in Shannon Monnet, who will talk about how to get our research into the hands of the public and the media. But I just want to thank our speakers again, Jim and Katherine. This was super helpful to see all of the amazing resources that are out there and organized and searchable. Like, I knew Nafta was awesome, but like now I really know how awesome it is. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're there for you. This is why NIA has funded us all these years. We want to help you. That's how our job gets done. So don't be shy. We love to talk about data. We love to help people find data or figure out how they're going to write their next grant or what they need for the publication. It's the most exciting part of our job. Otherwise, they sit around and read the news, which isn't as depressing as it was a few months ago, but still. So reach out to us, and thank you all
so
for
much.
attending. This was great. Thank you.
And it will be
Thank you,
recorded
everyone.
and posted for lots of other folks I know that had to leave early and then couldn't make it. So we're really excited about that. Thank you for allowing us to tape it.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.